All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for participating. I really appreciate it. I'm Mike Fritch. I know a lot of you, so I don't know, I have to spend a lot of time on introductions. It's good to see all the old friends and new friends as well. This session is Project Success Secrets, and I'm going to talk about what I consider the top 5 templates for project success and how to use a PMO Control Tower. And you can kind of see a little bit about me there on the cover page. I'm a PMP, been working in this field for a long time. I do write and speak on project management and operations, and been in a number of publications talking about those things. The perspective that I bring to this is really based on 25 years of project experience doing a lot of things across the globe and across industries. Previous projects, you can see those on the left. I won't belabor them. And previous results, you can see those on the right. And again, I won't belabor those either. The bulk of my corporate career was with Applied Materials, and about half of my client base has always been in the semiconductor industry. And so you'll see that a lot of this is semiconductor centric, but we've done a lot of other things in solar and in software, and clients ranging from Whole Foods Market to McKesson to American Science and Engineering. So a lot of different players and a lot of different places. And it's from those experiences and those lessons that I've put together this brief presentation, and we'll jump into it and go from here. So what I'm going to talk about is we'll talk a little bit about what's project success and what's failure. I'm going to talk about tailoring and what I call the Goldilocks principle. And from that, talk about what I think the 5 most essential project templates are. And then from there, how do you group those together into what I call a control tower to really ensure project success? And we should have some time at the end for some question and answer. And if you want me to dive into some live examples, if we have time, we can do that as well. What I'll do is kind of walk through, and again, we'll do questions at the end, and I can jump back to the appropriate slide as needed. So the first section, I really want to talk about project templates and how to use them to ensure project success. And when we talk about that and think about that, first we're going to define what project success is. And the traditional kind of textbook definition of success for a project is scope, schedule, and budget, right? So you're on time, you do everything you're supposed to, and you did it with the agreed upon budget. And I think that's very true, but the second measurement of project success, and in the real world, probably the more important measure of project success, is a project is successful if the project sponsor calls it a success. So, and sometimes you might say, oh, that's a cop-out, but the project sponsor is the person that's in charge of the organization relative to that project, and they, have the view of what the business requires. And so really, to be successful, you've got to make your project sponsor successful. And of course, many times, both of these will be required to be successful. But especially a new project manager, you really got to understand what is it that your project sponsor needs, make sure that you deliver to that. So, what's the other side of the coin then? So what is project failure, and what are the top reasons for that? So, studies show that, at least by that first definition of scope, schedule, and budget, only 8 out of 100 organizations have a success rate greater than 80%, and only 2.5% successfully complete all of their projects. So it's not uncommon for projects not to be a success. And as I've looked across and looked at studies and kind of the things I've seen in my own career, the top reasons for project failure I've got listed here on the left. And the inexperienced project manager is a big one. It's tough being a project manager. It takes more than the book smarts. You have to really understand the organization. You've got to have those stakeholder management skills and those facilitation skills, and you've got to have a little bit of emotional intelligence to make that happen. And for an inexperienced project manager, lots of the other things listed underneath this are things that they often will trip over. So, unclear goals and objectives. If you don't know what you're supposed to do, it's very difficult to get there. Poor stakeholder management. And to me, this is probably the number one. If you said, Mike, pick one, I would raise poor stakeholder management to the top, because not keeping the people that are important to the project, including the project sponsor, not keeping them in mind and not meeting their needs is really, really important. That's a huge area of failure. Lack of project visibility. So often the new project manager, for example, works in a silo. It's like, hey, I've got my little Microsoft project plan and it looks good to me, but I'm not showing it to anybody else. And nobody knows what's going on. And that links in with communication gaps, which is either miscommunication or lack of communication. Scope creep, which is especially true in software projects of, hey, let's add another feature. Well, let's do this, let's do that. And as you add more and more things into the bucket, the ability to accomplish those things and the understanding of what's really important gets very, very diluted. And then finally, a lack of resource planning. If you don't look ahead and say, what's it going to take to deliver the objectives that my sponsor is looking for, that often leads to some pretty big failures. And so, with that shaped my thoughts on what I consider the top 5 templates. And I will have these available for you tomorrow. I'll have the recording and a way to get copies of the templates if you like them. So you'll be able to take them and do with them as you see fit. But the way to prevent that, I really think the templates and kind of this control tower that I'm going to speak about is really a way to mitigate some of these risks and some of these factors. And so, for an inexperienced person, having a good sponsor and having templates that you can take some best practices from makes a big difference. A good project charter helps make sure goals and objectives are clear. A good stakeholder register covered with a communication plan is going to really help you manage those stakeholders. And using the control towers that I'll show you and having a communication plan will help in that project visibility and in those communication gaps. And for scope creep, having good requirements documentation and keeping a change log in place is a way to deal with that, prevent it, and understand its impact. And then finally, lack of resource planning. I look at the WBS as a way to do that if you couple the work breakdown structure with resource utilization. And so when I looked at the top reasons for failure and how to prevent them, that's where I chose these top 5 templates that I'll show you in just a minute. One of the really important concepts out of the project management book of knowledge, or body of knowledge rather, and the latest version is 6.0, is something called tailoring. And I'll let you read that. But if you look at PMI and you look at standards and you look at the templates I'm going to share with you, there's a lot of good stuff there. However, you don't have to do everything in the book by the book for every single project. And the concept of tailoring means that you find the appropriate level of management processes, of techniques, of tools, of phases that are needed to manage your project. And so, Yeah, you don't take something, it's not a blueprint that you absolutely have to adhere to. It's a blueprint that you modify to meet your project and business needs. And that's really important to remember. And in doing that, I like to think in terms of what I call the Goldilocks principle. And so you're familiar with the children's fable. You've got Goldilocks, and I always joke she breaks and enters and breaks into these four bears' house, finds three bowls of porridge, and one's too hot, one's too cold, and one's just right, and breaks some chairs and finds a bed that's too hard, too soft, and just right. Well, as you look at these templates and as you look at project best practices and the way that you're going to manage and control your project, you want to make sure that what you're using is not too big, not too small, but you want it just right. And what that means is you're putting in the right amount of control for the size and scope of the project. The amount of project artifacts, the amount of detail that you put into a charter or into a plan is going to be really different from, an enterprise, a $5 million enterprise global implementation like we did for command centers in Dell across, Japan and Europe and the US, as opposed to maybe a 6-week project to do an office move. Right? There's different things that are going to be appropriate for each of those circumstances. And so it's just as bad to be overzealous and have too much control and too much documentation and too much bureaucracy as it is to have too little. And so you've got to tailor the templates to fit your project. So there's some elements of them that may fit, but then you pick the right size template. And then you tailor your control tower to have those elements that you can see and control what has to happen. And so getting the right size of things is really the way that you want to go. And I often like to talk about it in terms of t-shirt sizes. It's a way that people can really kind of understand what you're getting at. You say, well, gosh, think of it, is it a small shirt, a medium, a large, or an extra large? And if you kind of use that as a reference point, you can kind of, make yourself think about, well, how much do I really need to accomplish this particular scope and meet this schedule? So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about some templates that I think are essential. And again, after the call, I'll have them available if you want to download examples of them for your own use. So the first is the project charter. And I've got the large and the small here. So you can take a look at the left for the large version and to the right for the small version. And really on, the minimum that you want to have for any project is that small version, because you want to just have a little overview of, well, what's the project or the product? What are we trying to do? Get some scope in there, like the objectives and high level requirements. And then, are there major deliverables or certain milestones that we have to hit? And you get that agreed to, people can look at it and everybody goes, okay, I kind of got the idea. I know what we're supposed to do. And then from a duration perspective, it's a timeline of, all right, well, we're supposed to take about so long to get it done. That frames it. And then finally, a budget estimate, which, for a lot of projects, it's not going to be necessarily a dollar amount. It's going to be, well, gosh, I'm going to assign 2 people 30% of their time to get this done. That's your budget. You can, use those resources as you see fit. If you go to the left and you're doing a larger project like, a factory ramp up or a big construction project or a big software development, then you're going to spend a little bit more time and go into a little more detail, and have things like the justification of the project, especially if it's a lot of money, that's the business need, the impact, how does it align with the business? On the scope perspective, many of the same things, but then boundaries, where does this play and where does it not play? And then on the duration, again, the timeline, but it'll be a much greater timeline. And since it's so big, you'll have some executive milestones in order to keep the higher level folks informed. They don't need to look at the very, very small work breakdown structure. And then, budget on a large project, there's almost certainly going to be dollar budgets and people budgets, et cetera. And then just, high level alternatives analysis. So if you're doing something that is a transformation, you're making a huge investment, and part of that charter is saying, well, we looked at the alternatives, we analyzed the alternatives and decided to go this way. And then you get into more detail where you can talk about your assumptions, your constraints, the risks, and then go into the project organization, because a larger project is going to have a lot more players and a lot more roles and responsibilities. So you want, even if it's a small project, use that small template and just get, it can be as small as 6 lines. It's not, you don't need to have a bureaucratic big freaking document for something that's small. But again, tailor it to your needs and choose the right size. Think in terms of the 3 bears, and is it a small, a medium, or a large? The next template that I think is essential is your stakeholder register. And it couples the stakeholder register with stakeholder management. So I'm showing you an example that we use in a lot of our engagements, and we tend to use a collaborative work management platform called Smartsheet. And I know there's a lot of folks from Applied Materials on the call. You guys have a big enterprise license for Smartsheet, and so a lot of you are probably using it already. And if not, there's probably project managers that are using it if you're not. But this is the grid view that looks like Excel and kind of behaves like Excel, but has a lot more power. But what I like about it as a platform is, for my stakeholder register, you'll notice that I've got kind of the standard columns that you might expect. So, what's the name of the person, their contact information, their title. They may have a particular team from the project perspective. They have a location or a project role. And then often when you're starting out with stakeholders, you may do some interviews or have some meetings. We'll include columns to keep track of that in the stakeholder register. Have a place for some comments. And then from a stakeholder analysis place, and then from the communication matrix, we will often add additional columns off to the right, and things like the influence level or the engagement level, which is important, maybe not so much on a smaller project, but I'd encourage you to think about it anyway. And it may just be, hey, I've thought about it, and it's, we're cool. But especially for a larger project, understanding the influence level of a stakeholder, how can they impact the success of this project, right? And the influence level does not necessarily correspond with somebody's position in the company, right? So, the vice president or the president or the business head does have high influence level, but it could be that, for example, a lot of things we do are in the field service realm. That senior engineer or senior lead engineer who's a technical expert and has been doing the job for 20 years often has very high influence level, because that person, he or she, has seen the customers and is well respected. And so they may not be high up in the organization, but their influence on the project could be very, very important. The other column we have there is the engagement level, which simply speaks to, as we're doing the project, is this person as a stakeholder, how engaged are they? How involved, and where are they? And we use a project management body of knowledge template that talks about going from unaware to leading, right? And it's kind of the spectrum of, oh, I don't know about it. Maybe I've heard of it, but I'm not sure I want to play. I don't think it's a good idea is resistant. Neutral is like, I don't care. Supportive is, yeah, that sounds good. And then leading is somebody who's out there taking the charge. And so, we like to list the engagement level of each of the stakeholders and, kind of understand that. And we may not chart out every single stakeholder, but the folks with high influence level and maybe medium influence level, we normally will chart that out. And the chart on the left is that C is for the current position and the D is for the desired position. So, in this example, that first stakeholder is not aware of what's going on with the project, and we'd really like them to be supportive. And so that helps us be aware of a gap, and that feeds into, well, how are we going to close that gap? And that has a lot to do with the linked template that goes with this, and that's the communications plan or communication matrix. And just screenshot of elements of that. The first piece of it is really the stakeholder identification, and so that's why your communication plan and matrix really needs to tie into that stakeholder list. And then you think about, well, what are the communication vehicles? How are we going to communicate with folks? And so the communication matrix talks about kind of the things that you're going to share with people. It might be a status report. It might be a budget. It might be the latest changes. But you want to understand what it is that you think you need to share, who you should share it with, what's the purpose, how often you're going to share it, and then who's in charge of it, right? And often it's like, is this internal or external? That could be internal or external to the project team itself. Or sometimes if you're doing a joint project with your end customer, like we've done with installation improvement efforts, a pilot at Intel, for example, that, internal could be, well, hey, this is internal to my field service team, to my own internal company. And then with the customer, whether it's Samsung or Intel or TSMC, I've got external things that I'm going to share, right? So making that deliberate decision about how you're going to do it is important. And part of communication, of course, is project meetings. And so deciding, what kind of meetings you're going to have, how often, who will the attendees be, and planning that out. Hand in hand with reporting, what am I going to do from a report perspective? And then just any other communication vehicles that you might have. There could be a newsletter. It might be, a monthly party that is a celebration and a status update. But what you again will do is tailor and find the things that are important to you and then get the right size. So again, a small project, you might not even do a communication matrix per se. You might say, hey, we're gonna have our weekly status meeting and look at it. And that's all we need to effectively communicate this project. And in my one-on-one with the project sponsor, I'll tell her how it's going. And that is perfectly adequate for what we need to do. So again, the communication plan and the stakeholder register and the stakeholder management, to me, are almost the same. They're really linked together. And often when I'm doing it in Smartsheet, I'll make one single sheet that has everything in one place with it, and then I'll link it as a report. The next item is the project requirements. And these will vary depending on the kind of project you have. But typically I like to think in terms of, listing the requirement out, having a description that kind of says more about it. I like to include a why and say, well, why is this a requirement? Categories will help as you want to sort things. And then I like to use a recommended priority list. And I usually try to keep it simple. like a must have, nice to have, optional, not needed, or not applicable. But I have worked on projects. I've been on projects where the priority was a 1 to 9, with 1 being the most important and 9 being the least important. And this was a huge software development project, and so it was really a lot of competing stakeholders trying to decide, included in this wave or not. And so they wanted to go to that degree of detail. But my recommendation is always, if you can keep it simpler, do so. This example, again, is what we do within Smartsheet, because one of the things we like about it is the ability to attach things to a row so that we can have a spec, or to have conversations. So, it's kind of direct messaging back and forth with that row. But, whatever you want to do, as long as you're capturing those requirements, and again, use that same Goldilocks rule of have the right amount of detail for the project that you're managing. Hand in hand with the requirements is your change management log. And this is the way that you deliberately keep track of, am I going to change any requirements? Am I going to change the schedule? And having a good organized way to do that is really important. Again, this example, we're using that same platform, so we can do the attachments and do the conversations. We've enabled a auto-generated system numbering for each column, for each row, so we can identify the item. We've done an auto-generated create date so that we know when the item was created. And then, things like, hey, what's the status? Is it open? Is it closed? What's the priority? Choose your drop down. What is the change? Is it for the product or the project or some other type of category? When do you want to close on this change and what you're going to do about it? And, so a target, then is it actually closed? Does it require some escalation? What's the action? What's the impact? What's the final resolution? And again, when you tailor this, it might be for a smaller project that all you're going to do is keep track of the change request and was it approved or not, right? And who approved it. So you could make it much, much smaller if that were appropriate for your project. And then finally, the last template that I think is the essential template is the schedule. And I kind of cheated because I get to do 4 things in one. And so again, I'm using the Smartsheet platform, which allows me to cheat. So I love it, because I am doing a work breakdown structure. So that gives me the project schedule. You'll see that this looks very much like Microsoft Project. So if you're a Microsoft Project house, you can do the same thing. But what the things that I like to do in order to better manage the project and to make a really good multi-use template, if you will, is everyone knows what work breakdown structure looks like. So, that you've got by default. But I like to enable a baseline, right? So that when we kick off the project, we say, well, as of June 1st, this was our baseline schedule. And as we go through, we may have change requests, and we're going to actually change that schedule. Without the baseline, we've got to do like Rev 1, Rev 2, Rev 3, and it's really hard to see where we were versus where we began. And so using the baseline, and here that baseline is designated by this bar underneath, right? So I can see, and I took a snapshot and made a baseline on the same day. So this illustration doesn't have good changes yet. But if in 2 weeks we were told pull in this project, then you would see that the task bars would be smaller than the baseline bars, right? Or if we pushed it out, we could see that. So at a glance, oops, sorry about that. At a glance, you can see where you were against the original plan. In really complicated projects, we'll move over to Primavera P6 which is hugely powerful project engine, and we'll do multiple baselines. But for most of the time, most of the cases that you'll probably run across, a simple baseline will do what you need it to do. The next item that's important and that I like because I can enable in Smartsheet, and you should do the same in Project, is identifying your critical path. And as I'm looking at this, I have the ability to turn that on or turn that off and see it. But of course, the critical path shows you the items that are going to impact your schedule. And so that's important, because if you start getting into conversations around, this task is going to be delayed, will it have an impact on the overall schedule? You need to know if it's on the critical path. Likewise, if somebody's saying we need to pull this thing in, or we have to recover the schedule, if you don't know the critical path, then you are likely to work on things that won't make a difference. And that is doubly bad and a double failure, because A, you're working on something that's not going to move the needle, and B, you're wasting resources that could be used elsewhere to really make a difference. So again, make sure you're looking at critical path and understand that. And then finally, from a resource perspective, the thing that I like for why I use the Smartsheet platform is the ability to turn on resource utilization and resource allocation. And so this little person symbol right here allows me to, using this assign to column, this puts the person into our resource pool. And if I can see how utilized they are with a couple of reports and a click, but what's nice is if I overutilize someone, then on that particular task, I get an alert that has the red person signal, and that says, hey, this person's over allocated, right? So, they're working 200% or 140% this week or this day. And so you can really understand the impact of your resource loading. You can plan it. You can, as you're signing resources and as you're making decisions about how you're going to accomplish the work, you automatically will see if somebody is becoming over allocated. And if you're doing it all in the same system, then anywhere that person is assigned on any project, if they're on the same Smartsheet instance, then they'll pop up. So let's say you are sharing a resource with your coworker who's working a separate project, and you have let's say you have a particular coder, a Java coder, and you're sharing her between both of your projects. If you both assign her the same day to a task at 100%, it'll pop up as over allocated. You can click, see that, and then say, okay, well, let me coordinate, and we'll just move her left or right, or we'll, she's not really working full time on mine, it's 50%, so we're cool. But put that in place, and that allows you to do the proper planning and then to manage it as you go forward. So those are the 5 essential templates that I think every project needs. And again, they should be tailored. So you use the right columns, you use the right headings, you use the right words, and you apply the Goldilocks principle to make them the right size, whether it's small, medium, or large. And of course, there's a whole boatload of other templates that you can use when appropriate. And, kind of in our template library, this is a partial list. And so you could look at this and go, Mike, you're crazy. The most important one is your requirements traceability matrix. That's the one, or the lessons learned log. You got to have that. And so we can, I won't fight you on one if you think for your situation it's more important than the others. But to start off with, I have you take my top 5 and then decide if you needed more after that. So that is the templates themselves and kind of what they do to project success and project failure. Next, I'm going to talk about bringing those all together into a project control tower and how that can ensure your success. But since since we've got a little time, I'm at 30 minutes. Let me pause here. And if anybody has any questions or comments on the slides that we've covered up to this point, we can take a few minutes and discuss those. So let me jump out the participants, and if you've got a question or a comment, jump in, and if not, I'll keep going, and then we can have more time at the end. So I'll give it a couple of seconds.
Mike, where do you typically store the documents? Are they all stored in Smartsheet or someplace else?
I tend to store them in Smartsheet, because I'll store them as an attachment. I'll do when I do my project control tower, and I forgot to answer it this way. Like, this is an excellent question, because I'm going to show it to you in the project control tower. So I usually do that. However, we have a lot of clients that, for example, have very robust SharePoint systems, or very robust SharePoint within Teams. And so what we'll often do there is simply link into SharePoint for the document. So again, you do what's appropriate. I love the ease of storing it in Smartsheet as an attachment, and having the rev control and that sort of thing. But it's like, if there's something that your organization uses and it works, then there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. You can link into it and go from there. Does it make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, great, thank you. Great question. Any other questions before I proceed? All right, great. So again, the project control tower, it's taking these elements, it's bringing it all together, and it's taking action. And I'm kind of cheating in that I'm making a distinction between a control tower and a dashboard, but they're very much the same. And these are a few examples. I've taken some generic Smartsheet templates, and I'll show you some specific examples that we use. But really, the idea of the control tower is a dashboard that shows you the information that you need to know to do things with. And I call it a control tower when you can take action. So for me, a dashboard, the distinction I'm making is a dashboard is just something where you have a visualization and you go, okay, I see what's going on. A control tower is when you can see what's going on and then take action in that portal and do something about it. Lots of ways to show the information. And so from a template perspective, I really think more in terms of a building block and best practices than a template. So I call it a template, but really it's follow these rules and make it be what you need it to be for your own success and your organization. This might be nearer and dearer to some of the folks on the call. These are examples that we've used. I've genericized them, so that's not real customer data, but these are things that we've actually used. On the left is fab tool installation management. So think in terms of a wafer fab, and that wafer fab is ramping up, or it's adding a new line, or it's doing an expansion, and the fab owner or her representative wants to manage all of the different equipment suppliers, whether it's Tokyo Electron or Intel, Tokyo Electron or AMAT or KLA Tencor or Vico or the pump suppliers or whatever. And so, in there we are looking at, schedules and the high priority comments of something that's going wrong, and then looking at a Pareto, and this one drills down on one business unit, but at the top there is visualizations for all the different stakeholders and vendors, for example. And then on the right is one that is more tactical, that is looking at a particular product line, and at a particular our business unit, and how well they are doing with the installations across all their customers. So this is more from an applied materials perspective, or a Tokyo Electron perspective, or a ASML perspective of how are we doing on our installs, and just the key things of where are we on schedule, what are some of the comments and issues that we have, and then in the middle some links to important resources and take action with that. So this I actually have as a demo, and if anybody wanted to see it after the call or during the Q&A, we can poke around with it. Again, an example with made up stuff, no real customer data there. So just a couple of things to give you ideas, but really the best practice, so this is what you do with those templates. Think about making a control tower. I highly recommend it. And the first thing is do something. So get something out there. We often start with really ugly stuff, right? Because it's like, oh, you need to see just the schedule, and let's throw a couple links out there. It's much better to have something that people can use from the beginning of the project, and then you can make it pretty as you go, rather than halfway through the project and then finally you can show something because you've got it prettied up. Now, that said, for the control tower that you share with the executives, you may decide, I got to make it pretty before I do, because otherwise I'll spend all my time worrying about font sizes and colors. Being a little facetious there, but so pick your battles. But get something out there, and then you can continuously improve it. And from project after project, you're going to make it better based on what your organization has done and what you see. Number two, you want to be driving decisions, actions, and results. And so don't get carried away. We're like, oh, it's really cool, I can show this and I can show that. You want to have the things that are going to make a difference and drive project success. Number three is what, for me, makes the distinction between a dashboard, a visualization that shows you information, and a control tower that allows you to take action and do something with it. So to go to that control tower step, put in things that allow you to do action. And that action may be, I'm going to just update my status, or I'm going to enter a note, I'm going to attach a picture of my deliverable, lots of things that you could do. The next is to know your audience. And so one of the things is, as we look at the control tower, the visualizations, it's better if you can have versions appropriate for each stakeholder group, right? So for the project sponsor and the VP level, you probably want to have just a quick summary and the ability to drill down. But for the folks that are doing the actual project work, you're going to have more detail. You may have a report of overdue tasks by person's name. You might have, a percentage on a particular work breakdown structure that is at the very detailed level that the sponsor doesn't need to see, and won't care about unless, of course, it's turning into a miss. So know your audience and build an appropriate version of the control tower to meet that audience. And so one of the things that I like about using the Smartsheet tool is that it's very easy for me to and easy for you to make copies of a particular control tower and then manage the widgets and customize it, and everything is linked in so you're not redoing work. If you can, tell the story in one screen, right? So somebody doesn't have to scroll. And if you're using a tool like Smartsheet, it's dynamic so that you can do it on your phone. That's very good. And when it can be done on your phone, that's where you really want to understand the real estate thing. But for the folks that are on the pointy edges of the stick, the people that are really working, often, it's like, hey, it's not going to be one screen. We're going to scroll down. But with that scroll down, we're going to highlight the most important information, and we're going to place that on the top. So as you think about structuring that control tower and putting in those components that I showed you previously, these are the things to keep in mind as you do that. And so to me, the essential building blocks where I'd say, hey, if Mike, I don't know where to start, where would I start? And I would start with the project schedule, because that's if you've done it like I talked about, like how I love to have the work breakdown structure, the critical path, and the resource utilization and the baseline, that one element, that one chart, if you will, or widget on your control tower says so much about the project. I mean, it's at a glance, you see what's going on. The requirement status, because that way, if people want to go, well, what do we mean by, completing X, Y, or Z? You can look and see what the requirements are and see where they are. Stakeholder communication. So I like to have the stakeholder list and reports around the stakeholders as part of that control tower. And it could be a widget that says, hey, if you're the, by role, click here to see the latest report. It might be a graphic that is shows who the stakeholders are, so you know how to get in touch with them, that sort of thing. Links to key resources. So this goes back to the previous question about, hey, where do you attach your documents? And we can do that. We'll do that in the Smartsheet, or we'll have it in your SharePoint or your OneDrive, and we'll have links. And there's the one thing I love too is the integration of Smartsheet and Microsoft Teams, on a Teams channel. And so we can have links to the Teams channel and that sort of thing. And then any relevant metrics. And so the example I've got in the, kind of the left thing is, do you want to make some bar charts to convey the information? Do you want to simply have a count? Do you want to, have a pie chart of, completed tasks, not started, and in progress, for example? There's lots of ways to slice and dice it. So really, you make the control tower what you want it to be, but I would start simple, start with these essential building blocks, and then just build from there. And like I said, I'm a huge Smartsheet fan, and so I do it in Smartsheet, but you could do it in other systems, or use whatever you have available and kind of take these same best practices. So that's everything that I wanted to cover today. We'll morph into the question and answer session if anybody wants to stay on and talk more, or reach out with questions to me. I'll put these links in the LinkedIn event, if you want to just message me, send me a message on LinkedIn. There's my profile there. You saw my profile because you signed up. If you want to email me, do that. If you want to book a call, if you're like, Mike, show me what's going on, click on that Calendly and we can grab 15 minutes to talk. What we do at PPS and at Confo, we do project management consulting. We'll do project management maturity assessments. We can be your outsourced PMO or give you fractional PMO services. And we do a lot of Smartsheet solutions and consulting. And if you're already doing Smartsheet, some of you applied folks, we've got something we call a Smartsheet Fast Start, because I get a lot of messages where people say, yeah, we're kind of using it, but we're not taking full advantage of it. So that's a way for you to turbocharge your efforts. So that's what I'm going to do now is I am going to stop recording.